All right, so in this recording, I want to take our code for this week and convert it to R Markdown. Ultimately, I want you to submit the result of your R Markdown product to Blackboard for your assignment deliverable for week 3. Okay, so in week 3, we've already gone through this. We've gone through all this code about functions and loops. I'm giving you a little assignment at the bottom. I'm giving you an additional data file, and then I ask you a couple questions. And I do indicate that for your assignment deliverable, please submit the deliverable in R Markdown form in PDF document. So that means that you have to go from R to PDF somehow. So to do that, we've already, at the beginning of this script, we've already installed R Markdown and Knitter, which are both packages that we're going to need to produce the R Markdown product. To open a Markdown file, over here, the same place that we add a new script, we can also drop down and add an R Markdown file. So I'll add an R Markdown file. I'd like it to be in PDF form. So we can click there. You can also produce an HTML file or a Word file. PDF's nice, it's clean, it's easy to transmit across the Blackboard interface. And maybe we just call it assignment, or let's see, lab 3. So I'm gonna just go to PDF, I'm gonna press OK. And then from there, now I have a new R Markdown document. It gives me some information about the document here. And then generally what I like to do is clear the document and start from scratch. There's a lot of stuff in here that comes with a new document. The first thing that we're gonna have to do is note that for R to understand that what you're running is Rcode, you have to note it as Rcode. And to do that, we're gonna have to set up our blocks or chunks of code in a specific Markdown language. So up in the upper left-hand corner of your keyboard, there's a key that allows you to add these symbols. So if we add 3 of these symbols, they look like a single quote, but they're not. You can add 3 of those symbols, a curly bracket, and we're going to tell it that this is our R setup chunk of code. And you can tell it if we want to include it or not. Generally, I'll say include equals to false, because this is really just setup information. I don't want this to be something that that gets translated onto our final document. It's okay if you want to keep track of everything. You can put it as equal to true, or go back and forth and set it as true and false, and you can see the difference between the two. I'm going to set some of my Knitter functions. So the Knitter is the way that we produce the file that we're interested in. You can see we actually have a knit option that allows to knit to HTML, to PDF, to Word. That's actually the process by which we take the code and make it readable in one of those outputs. So Knitter, in this case, I'm going to say the primary thing I want to do in my setup is I want to make sure that the output chunks are repeated. So we want to put echo equal to true. And all that means is that when we write code, the code is going to be translated onto our document. If you ever want to write a document, you want to hide the code, you just change that back to false. Inside of this block, this code block, I want to set my data location. So I'm going to do the same thing. This actually I can just copy from here. We can set our data location. And our working directory is that data location. And then we can require data table, and then we can read in the file that we wanted to read in. So this ultimately was the file that we were interested in reading in as our data file. So this is kind of how I set up the process. I want to read my data in, I want to bring in the packages I want to use, and I want to indicate that I want my code to be presented in the output. To close any single chunk of code, you're going to want to use that same symbol that we used above 3 more times, and you'll see that now it'll close the chunk. So this opens the chunk of code, and this closes the chunk of code. And in particular, these are the kind of things you want to do in a setup area. There's another chunk of code that we'll use for the rest of the document. But now what I can do is I can actually run this little line over here on the right-hand side, and or this little play button, and it'll actually show me whether or not it could run the function yet. Let's see. So I got an error. Let's see why I got an error. Oh, I got an S here. I shouldn't have the S. All right, so I can run this again. So it'll go through now, and it worked through the setup, and I can actually see that it set my data location and it read the data in. So now it's actually doing what I'm asking it to do, the same way that as if we were walking through R, but now we're doing it in Markdown form. And why is that useful? Well, I'll show you why it's useful. So first thing, maybe we want to add summary statistics for our new data, for our new GA data file. And again, if you use the same symbol only once, it'll actually highlight in code form what it is that you're trying to draw attention to. So I do this lots of times when I want to just draw attention to an object or a result, and I want, as people are reading the document, to be able to see that this is what I'm actually referring to. This is GA data. So I can run that. If I do that, now I need to set up a new type of code. So now I'm going to set up another chunk of code, the same thing I did before. I'll add a curly bracket, R, and now I have a standard set of things I want to do. Do I want to include this? No, I don't want the code to be included in the output. Do I want warnings to be included? No. And do I want messages to be included? No again. So in this case, I just want the output or the product of the code, what normally shows up down here in the console window, to show up in my output document. That, you know, it's sort of up to us how we want to deal with it. We can include the code or not. You can, again, play around with these if you want the warnings to show up, the messages. Generally warnings and messages are better kept in your console and in your terminal window, but sometimes the code is useful in your document. We're going to go back through and we're going to pull the code also a little bit later. So here's a few things I want to do, and I'm just going to copy this from the document. So here I want to explore the data. So that's going to be part of this. You can close the code now, but now let's run this chunk of code. You can see now when it runs the chunk of code and it has something to actually present. It didn't have anything to present above. We were just setting everything up. But now that I have something to present, it will actually show me what it was able to do. So the first thing it does is it's showing me my summary. It's showing me the head and the tail of the document, and names didn't actually, I didn't actually show, but I think that the names, yes it did. Here are the names and the summary below that. So it's showing you both of them, but now we can kind of see the results. We can flip around a little bit. We can see what the data looks like, but it gives us the ability to play around with the data. I'm going to close this window. And then the next thing I want to do is I want to bring over some of the text from our original document here. And so I want to start showing the multiple ways of creating the percentage variables. Remember, the first thing that we can do is iteratively produce the percent representation variables through hard coding of the hard coding. I just put through hard coding. And you might also note that I'm using these pound signs at different lengths. The one is the largest title case, and then the more of these pound signs you have, the smaller your font gets. So iteratively, I'm dropping the size of the case in the printout document. Okay, and let's do this example, then I'll kind of show you what that looks like. So if I bring over some of the information from the original document, here I want to do the same thing I did before. R include now is equal to true. Warning equal to false. Message is equal to false. And I want the curly, I forgot to put the curly bracket on here. And then I want to paste the code. And then let's close out this code chunk. So here's this code chunk. Let's run it. We can see that it's going to end up producing the percent variable. So we walked through the process. In the end, we were able to produce the percent variable. I did reset the data back to the original level. If we go back, we're here now. Now that we're here, let's go ahead and knit this file. So if I press knit, it's going to ask me to save the file. I'm going to save it. Function loops. I'm going to call it. I had another working file. I'll just call it for Markdown. You can run that. It's ready to go. Let's knit the file. You can see it'll go through the process, but then it's going to produce a PDF. So now we can see the PDF file was produced. And ultimately here, because we put include equals to true, we can actually see in our PDF file that we produced that it actually is going to show the code. And you can also see the different size of the headers, right? This was only 1 hashtag, 3 hashtags, 4 hashtags. You can see how much smaller they get iteratively as you're running the code. But now I have my lab 3, my name, the date, and I can start to walk through this process. I'm going to close this. And we're going to call it back a little bit later. All right, so number 3, I'm sorry, the next line of code was to create a function to produce the variables. So let's do that here. And R, we can just copy this if you want. It maybe makes it a little bit easier just to copy that each time you want a code chunk. And this time what we're going to do is we're going to run the loop process. We're going to come down here, copy this chunk of code, come back here, place it in the Markdown document, close the chunk of code out. This time we're creating the function and then implementing the function. So I'm just going to run that chunk of code. It ran it. It produced the same thing that we saw above, but we can tell, okay, it went through, it processed the percent variables just like we expected it to. If we want to use a for loop, that was the third thing that we did on our, the third thing that we did in our original R script. So let's create a for loop. We'll pull in all of this text from the for loop. We'll go to, here's this, but I need to put this here also, just to indicate that it is Rcode. Okay, so you can run through this. Now we'll run the for loop. It'll rename the data. The goal again would be, or visualize the data. It shows us what it looks like. But we have a few things here that we may be interested in looking at. One is the print statements. So I'll walk through the print statement. It shows us the column name and how long it took to run. Notice it takes a little bit longer if you run it in Markdown as opposed to the R script. It's okay. Here we can actually see what the data looks like. And this is just showing us the data again renamed. So remember, this is before we changed the names. When we just ran the head statement here on line 74, but in line 75, we changed the name and then we ran head again. And this is what the names look like when they were changed. All right, again, this is just the same stuff we did in our original script. For number 4, set up another code chunk. We're going to integrate the loop with the function. Okay, Control V. I'm going to copy that code in. we can run the code from here. Do the same thing. We see our variables have been produced here. Here, all this does is it's showing us the 4. It's hard to see them all. Showing a new window if you wanted to. This is just showing us a summary and the 4 indicators that it worked through. So the loop, remember we said to print I was 4, 5, 6, and 7. Okay, and then the last thing we wanted to do was create a t-test. So like over in the t-test area, this is where I might write a little bit more information about the t-test. Here I want to spell out that I'm running the t-test for mean differences after creating a new variable. And the new variable I put in those symbols so that it will kind of stand out, where we classify locations as urban if they have more than the median population. And again, I call out the variable. And rural if they have less than the median population. Okay, let's drop in the code here. So we want to drop the code in where we create the new variable and then we run the t-test. We need to set up the code chunk. Okay, we can run this line of code. Again, there's a lot of printout that comes with this, right? And we kind of talked a little bit about interpreting these t-tests in the first presentation that you got. On top of that, what I want to do is I'd like to add some text. And actually, I've already written this up, so I'll copy and paste it here just to make it easier. But I have some text here for interpretation, and this is where Markdown actually becomes really useful. If we take this, and so I went through and I interpreted each of the 5 variables and each of the t-tests. And so when I did that, you walk through the process, you say, the test results indicate that there is a significant difference of median age of urban versus rural. This probably should say for residents. For residents across the neighborhoods in the sample with the t-value of, and this is calling the t-values, and the p-value of. So the 2 things that stand out here that are interesting are that we can actually set this up so that we're creating a t-test as an output of this lapply function that we ran. So it'll actually save out the results of the t-value, and then we can actually call the t-test so we can get the same results. We can actually see the printout. But let's run this chunk of line, or this chunk of code again. I'm going to run it all, but notice now I have a t-test set of results, but I still get all my t-test results because I've called the t-test value here. I'm going to close this. I'm actually going to view t-test here on the right-hand side. So if I open up t-test, I can see the t-test has 5 different variables that the t-test was run on, because we've run it 5 times with this lapply function for these 5 different variables. So if we look at the t-test, inside of each of these different t-tests, we can open this up, we can see the t-statistic. So it's the t-test, median age test, it's the statistic of that test. We can see the p-value is the p-value of that test. And we can see the estimates are 39.5 and 36.8. So this is telling us there's a t-value of 11.9. It was statistically significant with a p-value less than 0.05. And in rural areas, the median age was 39.5. In urban areas, the median age was 36.8. We can do this for all of them. Say we look at the percent white. There's a t-value of negative 1.62, a p-value of 0.1. And the age difference was 53.6 versus, or the percent of the population in rural areas was 53.6. The percent of the population white in urban areas was 54.9. Do the same thing for each of these tests. But the important thing is that programmatically, we can take this test and plug it in here. So I'm going to say, the first thing I want to do is I want to call out the urban estimate from the t-test. So the t-test median age test estimate, remember again, median age estimate, this is the rural and the urban test. I'm sorry, the rural and the urban, yes, or the urban and the rural. So the urban is the first group. So I'm going to say, give me number 1, but I want to round it so that there's only 2 digits. For rural, I want to do the same thing, number 2. And if we look here, there's two estimates, right? Number 1 and number 2. We just need to know which one's urban and which one's rural. Because of the way it was coded, 0 is rural, 1 is urban. I believe it may be backwards. Yeah, 0 is rural, 1 is urban. So because of the way that it was coded, we have it set up so that rural comes first, urban comes second. So I'm going to call urban, I'm going to call what I should actually be doing here is calling it the other way around, right? So urban and rural is the first one. And then I want the actual values for the statistic so that I can show the t-value. The t-value statistic is 11.99. The p-value here is basically 0, but I'm also going to call in the p-value. But what this lets us do is directly in the text, we can specifically call out values. We could put the value is 2 plus 2, and the result would actually be 4 because we've told it that inside of this symbol, everything that follows until we close this code chunk is Rcode. So it should implement this Rcode. And the Rcode for rounding that estimate to 2 digits, if we just copy it and I run it down here in the console, is 36.7. So the urban average age is 36.7. And copy this one here, do the same thing here. The rural is 39.52. The t-test value, if I want to copy this and see it down here, is 11.9. And the p-value is 0, which means all I've done is run Rcode in text to populate the text. So then before I go forward, I'm just going to knit this just so you can see what that produces. We can close these things as they pop up. Oh. Give R a second to respond. I didn't mean to show the whole data file. What I'm going to do is pause the recording just in case this takes a while to catch up, and then I'll start the recording again. Okay, so it worked its way through. Here's the document that I've produced now. As I kind of walk through this, maybe this will become a little bit easier to see kind of the utility of running this in Markdown. One thing is now we have a PDF document. So this document is much easier to handle. It's easy to send along to Blackboard for review, but you can kind of see how the code chunks get captured. They're set off a little bit different than the other code chunks. And as you kind of walk through, you can see the results. So iteratively, we've been able to produce these results. We can see the percentages. Here, if we want to create a function, again, we did the same thing. We can see the result looks the exact same as our original file. We can see the loop that we ran and the result associated with that. Same thing here. If we want to insert our function into the loop, number 4, we've inserted the function into the loop. It's run through the process iteratively, and it's produced our these 4 different files. I think this view statement is actually what caused us trouble. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into R, and I'm actually anywhere we have view for the whole table, I am going to comment it out, only because I don't want your R to crash because we're trying to view the entire table. Okay, so this should work. And then the t-test. The t-test get run. We can see the table of the urban versus rural. areas. We can see how we've set up to run the lapply function against our 5 different variables. You can actually see the results from all the t-tests are documented here, but then there's a little bit of a write-up. And this is where this becomes useful in terms of integrating the code directly into R. Now we have this code that we've set up over here on the left-hand side, but we also have the results of that code here on the right-hand side. That actually is much easier to read, and you can see kind of where we've called the urban average age, the rural average age, the t-value, and the p-value. Now all those came from something that's programmatically saved in R, and the way that we call it here is that we actually run a little bit of R code. Ask for the urban number, ask for the rural number, ask for the test statistic, and ask for the p-value. So that gets us to the point where we're able to produce this. I would like for your result for lab number 3, if you go down to the bottom of our original script, for you to work with the economic data from Virginia. I've given you another file called Virginia Block Group Econ Data. You can use some of the code that we have here. You don't need it all. Remember that these 4 different chunks essentially do the same thing each time. So you can pick one, whichever one you're comfortable with, use that. Some of them are more efficient than others, but you won't get docked points here. Ultimately, you just want to be able to produce the results. And we want to produce summary stats for the number of the number and the percent of residents that have a high school graduate degree, or that are only high school graduates. Let's change this a little bit, that are classified. How about that? As high school graduates. And you can see that the HS grads is the variable you're going to be looking for in that data set. That are full-time employed, and the FT employee is the variable you're going to be looking for. On public assistance, there's a variable there called public assist, and who are homeowners. Homeowners is the variable you're going to be looking for. So you want to run that. Ultimately, all you want to be able to do is just produce the summary stats. The summary stats are simply this set of statistics here, where you're able to see what the minimum, the maximum, the median, and the mean are. So you just want to be able to run this summary on that data file and produce these results. But then you also want to run a t-test like we did at the end of the code. And you want to see if economic indicators vary significantly by grouping the data based on median of total population, the same as we did in this lab. And by the same in this lab, it's just the urban versus rural dichotomy. And you can use the same exact approach. You just want to be able to cut the data into urban and rural by median of population, and then compare and see if they're different. If the percent of high school grads in urban and rural areas is significantly different. If the average percent full-time employed in urban and rural areas is statistically different from one another across urban and rural areas. If the percent of population on public assistance is significantly different across urban and rural areas. And if the percent of the population who are homeowners is significantly different across urban and rural areas. And again, when you're done, you'll want to submit some kind of a document that looks like this. The exact format is sort of up to you. The only 2 requirements that I have is that it does include something like this, which is a summary printout for question number 1 to make sure that you're answering this part on the descriptive statistics, and then that you create the t-test results like we see here. These are the t-test results all the way down to here, and that you write up those t-test results the way that we've written up the results here. So you want to be able to do something like this, where you're integrating the results from our lab directly into a PDF document, which you can submit to Blackboard. And then this will be your deliverable. The only thing is you're changing the results to that Virginia economic data as opposed to our demographic data from Georgia. if you have trouble creating the PDF file, there is one document, there's one code that I gave you here at the top of the Markdown file that you may want to run. I don't actually see it here. I can put it in again. I'm going to comment it out. But if you're having trouble running this, let's see. If you're having trouble running, getting the file to run in PDF, try to run this line of code. Tiny text is something that comes down with our Markdown, but sometimes you need to install additional dependencies and components. You can just take off the comment sign here, run this line of code. You always want to recomment it. This takes a while to run. And after it runs, you want to completely shut down and restart our RStudio. And when you do that, when you reopen RStudio, the changes that you've integrated from running this line of code should be integrated, and you should be able to produce a PDF document as your output. The other thing you can do just while we're here is this could be an HTML document. If we knitted an HTML document, you can see we get a little sort of web page ready document. It's a little bit easier to read. The HTML format does a better job of capturing the differences between code and output and allowing you to differentiate between the two. It also does a good job of highlighting the places that we've called out. So when we added the code info early on, you'll be able to see that a little bit more as call outs in the text. The HTML unfortunately doesn't upload to Blackboard as easy. I think that sometimes the Blackboard sees it as code and thinks it may be malicious and won't allow it to upload. But you can see that you can produce this information as an HTML document or a PDF document, or even, I think it's a .doc. I'm not exactly sure what see if it runs. It won't run. You can actually produce as a Word document too. I don't know what the command is. I don't use that very often. If I'm going to run this in, yeah, here we go. So now it would also convert and create a Word document. You can kind of see the results and the code base and everything else there as a Word doc. PDF is generally the way you want to go. Once you have it in our Markdown, what I would encourage you to do is learn to edit the file here as opposed to having to go to Word document. You can insert figures here, you can insert tables. There's lots of stuff you can do here, and you would always have the text directly linked back to your database and to the code. If you had questions, one of the things that you might want to do is look for an Markdown cheat sheet. There's an R Markdown cheat sheet. It's pretty good at sort of giving you sort of the high level information about R Markdown. You can see how you set up R Markdown, how you choose the output, the way here's the HTML, is it a PDF, is it a Word document, how you can set the different header sizes based on the number of comments that you have. If you wanted to make information bold versus not bold, you can add information to add tables if you wanted to do that. There's just a lot of different information, a lot of different things you can do here. You can create Shiny interactive documents, which are actually useful. We'll end up using Shiny later in the semester. But this just gives you some information. I would just Google that and use that as a tool for kind of while you're working with the R Markdown information. Okay, so I'm going to save these out. I'll make sure you get access to all the documents or to be filled in. You may want to fill in a document yourself alongside the video, but if not, I'll have the Markdown file and the original R script available for you.